I was still wearing black. The fabric clung to my skin like a heavy shadow, holding the scent of roses from the funeral bouquet that had been placed on Harold's casket. Even now, hours later, I could smell the sweetness of decay petals that had been perfect that morning were already beginning to curl at the edges. The last shovel of earth had barely been tossed before the family scattered back to the estate. They didn't gather to mourn, not to share memories, not to sit in the warmth of silence for the man who had once been the center of our lives. No, they came for the feast and the fortune. The long hallway that Harold had once polished by hand now buzzed with voices. Laughter ricocheted off the crown molding. Footsteps thudded across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with perfume and aftershave, foreign scents that didn't belong in this house, our house, my sanctuary. From the foot of the grand staircase, I watched them divide up my life like vultures circling a carcass. "That one's mine," my grandson declared, slapping a neon green sticky note on the face of the grandfather clock. He moved on quickly, the leather armchair next, then the glass cabinet that still held our wedding china. His sister, not even looking at me, stood with her phone out, an app glowing on the screen, blueprints and measuring lines shifting in real time. "We'll remodel this once she's out," she said, not caring if I heard. "Spa room, maybe. Definitely better lighting." I gripped the banister. The same banister Harold had once smoothed down with his bare hands, and tried to steady my breathing. No one offered me a chair. No one paused their cheerful looting. My daughter-in-law appeared, a tray of champagne flutes in her manicured hands. "We're celebrating Dad's legacy," she said brightly, as if the words were a toast. "And cleaning out the ghosts," someone muttered from behind her. A ripple of laughter followed. It started with a folder. Old, worn, leather-bound, the edges frayed from years of being handled in secret. I kept it hidden beneath a loose floorboard in what was now my bedroom, the laundry room behind a crate of mop heads no one ever touched. Inside was the truth they had erased. The morning after my granddaughter measured my bedroom for a spa conversion, I rose early, before anyone else, and pulled the folder out. I walked 2 blocks in the cold to the payphone outside the pharmacy. They had accidentally cut off my cell service, but I still remembered the number. When Mr. Alden answered Harold's lawyer for decades, I spoke only 2 words. "It's time." He didn't ask for clarification. He simply said, "Come in tomorrow." The next day, I sat across from him in his paneled office. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Slowly, deliberately, I laid the documents on his desk. First, the joint trust certificate, my name, right beside Harold's as co-founder and co-executor. Then, the investment agreement from the First Savings Bank of California, dated 15 years ago, proving the deposit from selling my dowry and heirlooms. Last, the handwritten pages yellowed now, the corners curled, containing the original IPO proposal. "You wrote this?" Mr. Alden asked quietly. "I sent it," I replied, under a pseudonym. That proposal had made Harold millions, saving the company entirely. No one had ever known it came from me. Mr. Alden's eyes narrowed. "We'll need a handwriting analyst. And a plan." For the first time in years, I felt the corners of my mouth lift into something like a smile. Not out of joy, but recognition. The woman they thought had vanished was about to speak again, and this time, the whole room would hear her. Mr. Alden leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together, studying me with the same measured patience I had once admired in Harold. "If you can prove authorship of the IPO model," he said, "you own the intellectual property. That includes all residuals, royalties, and associated rights." I nodded, though my hands were steady only because I pressed them into my lap. I'm not doing this for the money. Then why? His voice was curious, but I sensed he already knew. I thought of the voices in my home, laughter like broken glass, claiming and dividing what they hadn't earned, because they buried me while I was still breathing, I said. And I'd like them to know I was the one holding the shovel when the company rose again. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Then we'll make sure they hear it. The analyst arrived that afternoon, a woman in her 40s with hair pulled into a severe bun, her glasses perched low on her nose. She handled my handwritten pages like they were fragile relics, tracing each curve and loop of ink. By the time she left, she had everything she needed to prove the model was mine. Mr. Alden promised the report would be ready before the will reading. And when that moment comes, he said, you won't need to raise your voice. The truth will do the talking. I left his office and stepped into the cool evening air. The streetlights had just begun to glow, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. For the first time in months, I walked with my head high, not out of pride, but out of certainty. His law office was all glass and leather cold in a way that made me think of marble gravestones. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the city beyond. I sat at the far end of the table in a folding chair, of course. Heaven forbid my old lady presence clashed with the polished walnut and tailored suits. Joseph, my son, sat near the front with his wife. They whispered to each other, a smirk passing between them. I heard his voice, low but clear enough. She'll be gone by next Christmas. Don't expect a dime for her. My granddaughter was texting under the table. My grandson doodled his signature on a legal pad, practicing for the inheritance he believed was already his. No one looked at me. Mr. Alden entered with his briefcase, his presence pulling the air taut. He began reading the will. Harold's voice, recorded in slow, measured tones, filled the room. And then the words came. If my son ever speaks ill of his mother, deduct $1 million per word. Silence fell like a curtain. Mr. Alden read the transcript, every insult, every cruel remark Joseph had made. The deductions stacked up, $88 million in all, leaving him with just $3,800. Joseph's face went pale. This is insane, he shouted. You can't! He would, I said quietly, my first words of the day, and for the first time, the whole room looked at me. Alden waited until Joseph's voice faded into the silence, then lifted a second envelope from his case. This, he said, his voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade, pertains to an intellectual property matter not previously disclosed to the family. He spread several documents across the polished table, each one bearing dates, signatures, and seals. 15 years ago, he began, shortly before Brightwood Industries avoided bankruptcy, an anonymous IPO proposal was submitted. The model presented in that proposal became the blueprint for the company's public offering and was instrumental in securing its survival. Joseph scoffed. It was Dad's company, his plan. We all know that. Mr. Alden didn't look at him. He simply flipped to the next page. The proposal was filed under the pseudonym E.B. Sinclair. At the time, the author was assumed to be a consultant or strategist who preferred anonymity. He paused just long enough for everyone to lean forward, their curiosity spiking. But after a recent forensic analysis, ink composition, handwriting comparisons, postal records, we have confirmed that E.B. Sinclair is, in fact, his hand gestured toward me. Your mother, Eleanor Brightwood. The air in the room shifted. Catherine, my granddaughter, dropped her phone. Joseph's wife went stiff, her hand clutching her scarf. Joseph just stared at me, blinking, as though I'd suddenly spoken a language he didn't understand. Mr. Alden continued, his tone unwavering. The patent for what is now known as the Brightwood stabilization model is legally hers. It yields annual royalties of $9.4 million. Effective immediately, those royalties, along with the residual rights, are transferred solely to Mrs. Brightwood. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable, filling every inch of space they had once claimed as their own. No one spoke at first. The rain outside tapped against the glass walls in a slow, steady rhythm, like a metronome counting down the seconds it would take for them to realize what had just happened. Joseph's mouth opened and closed twice before sound emerged. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I believed him not because he was innocent, but because he had never cared enough to ask. "I know," I replied. My tone was even almost gentle, but there was no kindness in it. Mr. Alden slid a black folder toward me. Inside were the deeds, the portfolio transfers, the patent rights, and tucked between them a deed to an apartment in Paris. At the very top lay a letter in Harold's handwriting. "Forgive me for the years I let your light stay hidden. I never forgot. If they cannot see it now, let this speak for me. You built this with me. Let the world know your name." I closed the folder slowly, letting my fingers rest on the worn leather. Around the table, no one met my gaze. Catherine stared at the floor. Joseph's wife tapped her phone under the table, her movements sharp and jerky. My grandson leaned back, arms crossed, his earlier smirk erased. For years, I had been the background to their story, an afterthought, a shadow. Now, I was the page on which the story had been written, and they had just realized it. The letter went out the next morning. Signed by the executor, stamped by the court, a legal deadline, not a suggestion. 48 hours to vacate the premises. The hallway that had echoed with laughter and careless insults now thudded with the sound of boxes being dragged across the floor. The neon stickers they'd slapped on my furniture were peeling, curling at the edges like wilted petals. I walked slowly through the house, letting the sight of them packing burn itself into my memory. Catherine's eyes were red, her hands moving quickly as she swept jewelry into velvet cases, jewelry that no longer belonged to her. Joseph tried. "Please, Mom," his voice cracked, and for a second, I saw the boy who used to clutch my hand during thunderstorms, but that boy was long gone, replaced by the man who had calculated my worth in dollars and insults. "You spoke first," I said quietly. The will simply listened. His shoulders sagged, as though the truth weighed more than the boxes in his hands. From the kitchen came the sound of his wife's voice, sharp and shrill. "She's heartless. Do you hear me? Heartless." I stepped into the doorway. "No," I said. "I gave you a house. You gave me hell." Her mouth opened for another retort, but I was already walking away. Room by room, I reclaimed the space. The stickers came off the blue one on the antique dresser, the yellow one on Harold's armchair, the green one on our wedding photo. Each one I folded once before dropping it into the trash. By the time the second night fell, the house was still and clean, stripped of their noise. By the evening of the second day, their voices were gone. No laughter, no murmurs behind closed doors, no footsteps running down the stairs as if they already owned them. The silence was not empty, it was full of the house breathing again after years of holding itself tight. I moved slowly from room to room, as if greeting an old friend I hadn't seen in decades. The dining room, where Harold had once carved the Thanksgiving turkey by hand, now held only the faint scent of lemon oil from the polished table. The study still smelled of his pipe tobacco, sweet and earthy, the scent stubbornly clinging to the walls. In the back garden, I found the small rose bush I had planted when Joseph turned 5. The soil was dry, the stems brittle, but the roots were still there, stubborn, waiting. I fetched the rusted watering can from the shed, filled it from the kitchen sink, and poured slowly, watching the ground drink. "We bloom again," I whispered, not because they believed it, but because I had never stopped tending the roots. That night, I slept in my old bedroom for the first time since Harold's death. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Outside, the wind moved through the pomegranate tree, whispering like an old friend. By morning, my decision was clear. The house had been reclaimed and now it was ready to be released. The house sold in the spring, not out of anger, not even for revenge, but because some walls collect too much noise, and no amount of dusting can quiet what's been said inside them. The paperwork was quick, cleaner than I expected. By April, I had moved into a small penthouse in Santa Barbara, the kind with white curtains that swayed in the ocean breeze and wide windows that let the light spill in like honey. There were no creaking stairs here, no stickers on my furniture, no voices claiming what wasn't theirs, only the hush of waves breaking against the shore and the faint cries of gulls in the distance. The royalties from the patent arrived each quarter, as steady and quiet as the tide. I didn't need most of it, so I began something new, a foundation with a long name, Women Who Were Erased. No galas, no ribbon cuttings, just scholarships, grants, and quiet recognition for women whose work had been buried under someone else's name. I knew that ache too well. The hollow feeling of watching your ideas live in the world without your signature. One afternoon, a woodcarver in town finished a sign I had commissioned. It was made from a piece of the old oak tree Harold and I had planted decades ago, salvaged when a storm split it years back. The words were simple. This house was funded by a burden. Enjoy the silence. It hung by my front door, swinging gently in the ocean breeze. The mailman laughed every time he saw it, and I never explained it. Inside, I kept only what mattered, a few essentials, a few memories. Among them, taped to my refrigerator, was a crayon drawing my youngest grandson had made years ago, a stick figure of me in large glasses, standing next to a giant light bulb. In uneven purple letters, it read, "To Grandma, you think better than Google." They had told me I was fading. They had told me my memory was slipping. They had told me to sit down, stay quiet, and be grateful. But I never stopped thinking. I was patient. I was watching. I was remembering. And when the moment came, I spoke.